Hello, investors. This is Todd Thomas, Associate Portfolio Manager with Revere Asset Management. Today is Saturday, May 10th, 2025 at 3 o'clock p.m. Coming to you from Boca Raton, Florida, to bring you the Revere Roundup weekend walkthrough. And starting with the trend gauge, two green arrows in both the leaders, as well as the 21 EMA, and now a green sub arrow this week on the medium term, as we've spent now the last week and a half above the 50-day moving average on both the indexes. And as the upcoming week approaches, we should start to see the 50-day moving average start to flatten out a little bit. And then we will possibly be able to raise this to a green arrow. But currently, both indexes are below the 200-day moving average, within 1 or 2% below. Going to last week's highlights, wanted to talk about, first off, the U.S. indexes digest the S&P's 17% rebound entering the week, with a modest 0.5% pullback on the week on lighter volume, despite the largest week of earnings on the calendar. Also, the Federal Reserve meeting resulted in keeping rates unchanged. Fed noted economic activity continued to expand, unemployment and labor markets remain solid, but the risks are still with inflation being elevated, as well as a potential for stagflation. Also of concern, potential higher unemployment and higher inflation upcoming. Also this week, the UK trade deal was announced. However, tariffs stay at 10%, but there was some relief on automotive as well as steel and aluminum. And the Trump administration also announced plans to rescind and replace the Biden-era regulations on AI chip export restrictions. And they're going from a tiered system to direct negotiations with individual countries. Also, pharmaceutical stocks drop on a threat of new tariffs on pharma imports over the next 2 weeks. Plus, the FDA appointed Dr. Vinay Prasad, a noted critic of the COVID-19 response, which also contributed to the selling in drug and biotech stocks this week. Cryptos were on fire this week. Bitcoin broke above 100,000, and Ethereum was up 31.6% on the week. Also, Robinhood, also heavily involved in crypto, broke out. And this weekend, high-level trade officials from the U.S. and China are meeting in Switzerland. This is the first face-to-face meeting, and we will be conducting that meeting through tomorrow to see if there's any breakthrough in China and U.S. trade talks. Finally, India and Pakistan announced a ceasefire agreement after U.S.-led talks. This just came out this morning. Looking at crypto on the week, Ethereum exploded 31.64%. Congratulations to GROTECTION for capitalizing on this move this week, as they bought Ethereum the week before last. Across the board, strong gauge in Dogecoin. Bitcoin was still up 8.43% on the lower end of the gains for the week. However, Bitcoin is the number 2 performer year to date. As you can see, all these other cryptos are down on the year. In terms of 1 week sector performance, the industrials, consumer cyclicals, and energies were up. Healthcare was down significantly, as mentioned, and communication and consumer defensive were down. Year to date, utilities lead, with basic materials and consumer defensive. On the downside, technology and consumer cyclical are still down 7% and 8%. For the heat map on the week, overall, pretty quiet, flat week for most stocks. However, Google was down 6.8% on concerns of competition from AI models taking over search. Of course, we mentioned here the pharmaceutical group got hit substantially, especially Eli Lilly. United Healthcare down another week, and Merck and AbbVie also down. The chips were up on these talks of rolling back the Biden restrictions, and a small rebound in energy. Gold and silver were also up. Boeing was up 5% too, as they got some contracts from China and also from India. ETF wise, again, small losses in the major indexes. Semiconductors up 2%, gold rebounded 7% on the week, and silver was up 2% on the week. Overall, crypto was the big standout and the big winner on the week. Okay, as always, I like to bring bullish quantitative numbers, and this came from Sentiment Trader this past week. And this is basically a list of any time the NASDAQ composite rallied 14% or greater from the 52-week low, and then the following week had less than a 3% drawdown, showed exceptional returns in the year ahead. So again, 14% rebound from the lows, and then the week after that 14% rebound, a drawdown of less than 3%. So out of all these instances, we've averaged a 39% return over the next 12 months, almost a 40% return, with only one negative return in 2001. In all the years where we had a drawdown of more than 3% on the down week, the loss was an average of 13%. So another pretty compelling stat on the thrust power of a big rebound after a sharp sell-off. And here we are, the week of May 8th, another big, heavy earnings week. Again, the last 2 weeks were the heaviest, and this is the third heaviest week of the season. And from the IBD, the stocks we're going to be watching, I highlighted. We'll be watching Monday.com, but it's been a laggard. CyberArk in the security area. New holdings from Brazil is poking its head above the 200-day moving average. SE, another foreign stock with strong relative strength, we'll be watching. Make My Trip from India, Sony, Alibaba, Kava, Deere, Doximity, Take-Two, and Walmart. So several notable earnings coming up. And here's a list from Earnings Whisper of most stocks by day. Once a quarter, the IBD comes out with new buys from the top performing mutual funds. And I've highlighted all the purchases of individual stocks that were close to $1 billion. Palantir leading the relative strength list with almost $1 billion worth of new fund buys. Netflix also with $2.2 billion worth of new buys. CrowdStrike with almost $2 billion. Amphenol with almost $800 million. NatWest Group and the banks almost $1 billion. Eli Lilly with $5.3 billion, Robinhood $1.2, GE Vernova almost $1 billion, DoorDash a huge standout at $6.5 billion, TKO with $1 billion, and JP Morgan, Thompson, and CRH with $3.5 billion. That's an Irish maker of concrete. And again, because it's earnings season, I want to continue to show the biggest price changes amongst the IBD 50. Dave, huge standout, up 60%. HIMS, another stock we're all in for GROTECTION, TurboTection, and the Toddzilla beta test portfolio. All invested in HIMS with TurboTection with a huge gain. Robinhood, we're all invested in this as well. New name on the list, Technoglass, which is a Colombian company standing out, as well as Axon. On the downside, Palantir closed well off the lows of the week, but down 5.6. CrowdStrike also on job cut announcements of 5%, and Sprout sold off 7%, as well as ADMA in the biotech area down 15%. And talking about the world markets, just wanted to show you the leading ETFs and how much they're up on the year, with Poland leading up 42%. Spain, Germany, Chile, South America, this is an area we're highly interested in. Chile up 26%, Mexico in TurboTection, EWW up 26%, as well as Brazil up 17%. And of the individual stocks in the leader list, Mercado Libre reported earnings this past week. Number one, Train, which is an Irish company in the data center cooling area. Number three, Deutsche Bank has been on our list. Technoglass, a Colombian maker of glass windows. Johnson Controls of Ireland, which we talked about this past week. And Oddity, which could be the new consumer products company, similar to what Elf did, and as well as Barclays. On the upcoming economic number front, we've got the CPI next week, retail sales, PPI, Empire State and Philly Fed, as well as industrial production and capacity utilization. And the other big one is the U of M consumer sentiment preliminary. So big week for economic numbers again, as the bond market was down again this past week. Okay, let's go to the individual charts. Starting with, let's get the S&P list up. All right, the S&P 500 with a flat to down 0.47% week on less than average volume, which is a good sign, a digestion week. Currently about 2% from the 200-day moving average, but a nice quiet week with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days now above the 50-day moving average. And as the week goes on, we should start to see this 50 flatten out some. And we could potentially enter a power trend within the next week or two. Going on to the NASDAQ composite, only down 0.27% on less volume. The Qs down 0.18. Equal weight was up fractionally on the week, looking a little better on equal weight basis once you remove the Mag 7 weightings. The real standout is the equal weight NASDAQ 100. That closed basically just shy of the 40-week moving average and pretty much right on the 200-day moving average. So pretty normal action to initially reject and kind of backfill off of this break through the 200-day moving average. High on Thursday of 90.85. So we'll see if we can take out that 90.85 and then that 91.08 area on the equal weight. So showing breadth is still decent. Russell was up slightly on the week. Volatility in the VIX index dropped another 3.44%, however, is still slightly elevated at 21.9. We'd like to see this get down into the mid-teens. The dollar had another slightly positive week, up 0.39%. That index is down about 6% on the year. Bonds had another down week, which meant yields were up 4.8 on the 30 and 4.375 on the 10-year. Not the direction the Fed or Scott Bessent wants to see. Bitcoin, a strong week, up 6.29. We went over all the cryptos. And the semiconductor index went out at the highs of the week, up 2.06%. Still one of the weakest looking groups out there. Again, very cyclical, as well as, definitely in the crosshairs of the tariffs, as well as NVIDIA. So still well below all its longer term moving averages. Gold with a positive week, but struggling to break through the week before last highs. Silver up 2.3%, gold miners up 3.29%. The Euro 50, new highs on the week, up slightly over 0.5%. And the Roundhill Mag 7, slightly down on the week. Going to the individual Mag 7 names, we took positions in Tesla, all three of our portfolios this past week. Again, my portfolio is called the Toddzilla. It's currently in beta testing, but it's a reflection of my own personal trading. And again, we all bought this Tesla early in the week. Again, had poor earnings, positive reaction. Was able to break through the 200-day moving average and close above this resistance at 21.85. So positive development on a pocket pivot for the day on Friday. Apple weak again. Amazon slightly positive on the week. Microsoft, the best of the Magnet 7 up on the week and continuing to hold its earnings gap. Although earnings growth is slowing quite a bit, 13% for the rest of this fiscal year and 13% for next year, but still a very solid stock and a big 26% consolidation that started from last summer. So really been going sideways since last July. You know, a 26% base now. NVIDIA, 2.15 on the week, but improving. Definitely also able to stay above the 50-day moving average, but well below the 200-day moving average. Meta backed off at 0.76% on the week, but still holding its earnings gap and trading above both key moving averages. And Alphabet, the weakest, down 6.88% on competition fears as well as government FTC issues. And now let's go through the watch list. Again, several gold stocks look good. You know, you can go through the gold stocks on your own. We're more interested in the innovative stocks out there, but Pan American Silver looks good. Still 86% growth this year, 31% growth next year estimated, and trading fairly tight. Had a big day on Friday, post earnings this week. So just wanted to put that on the list. Spotify continues to move, was up slightly on the week, outperforming the S&P, still in the double bottom base pivot range. Duolingo advanced another 5.4% after its monster earnings gap last week. So far, again, very strong action, holding the high volume close day of the earnings gap up day, undercut it a little bit intraday, but closed every single day above it and closed out the week at the highs. Again, this education area, you know, Duolingo dominating through AI, it's a big area, and we've seen it in LRN and a couple other names. Netflix just kind of hanging out on lighter volume this week, down 1.4%. Boeing finally broke out through the double bottom pivot on new orders from several countries this past week. So strong volume on Thursday and follow through on Friday. So again, looks like a new stage 2 base early in development. And Philip Morris still looking good, but a reversal on the week. LRN, this is the other online education for K through 12, as well as some specialty programs, down a little bit on the week. CrowdStrike down on the week on their news rubric. Relative strength making new highs. Again, this has been on the focus list for a while. Zscaler continuing with a slight gain on the week after a nice clean and simple base early cheat buy and tight, almost flat closes all week. So looking good heading into earnings in a few weeks. Okta broke out of this cup base. Another security stock, not much volume on the week, but is showing strength with that group. Take-Two fought off last week's decline on the Grand Theft Auto delay and closed up 3.2% on the week. So that's holding in there relatively well. Roblox also holding in there, down 5% on the week. Carpenter, a GROTECTION name in the specialty metal area, very tight close, only down about 0.3% on the week. ATI, another standout in the specialty metal on earnings this week to go along with Carter. Looks good, or CRS, I'm sorry. Broke out straight off the bottom, tight move out of this 43% deep base. So strength there. Root is another stock we're keeping an eye on. They had earnings here early in the week. Volatile week, so still trying to find its footing here. Dave was a big standout in the fintech area with a huge breakout gain of 59% on the week and a huge gap in open move up 41% with a monster earnings gap, volume up 400%. and a second day follow-up. So if you get involved in one of these, you're happy to see that type of action because it's stellar. Dutch Bros had a nice shakeout on the earnings. We look at the intraday chart. We see it gapped down on the earnings, shook out, rallied, gapped down again, and then shot up here on Thursday. And actually, this was the earnings gap day. So a volatile week of trying to find its footing, but managed to close. Actually, Thursday was the day of the earnings here. Nice volume and broke above the 200-day. We all took positions in this stock this week as well. MicroStrategy continues with Bitcoin. It is definitely the leading stock and actually tends to lead Bitcoin. Nice week. Monster Beverage, some strength. Wanted to bring Celsius back on the list after a nice shakeout down to the 50 and the 200-day moving average with a hammer off of those indexes or off of those averages on Tuesday of last week. Had a tight close on Wednesday and then closed the week out at the high. So again, I think this is pretty normal action when you see a stock come from a big decline like Celsius had here, big stage 4 downtrend, then this huge gap up on the week that they acquired. I forget the name of the company here, but stock is turning and that 200-day is downward sloping. So it naturally takes some time. You've got all this overhead up here. So you're building kind of this nice stage 2 type base, which started back here. And what we need to see is that 200-day flatten out and a powerful breakout through that 39.16 area. And it could be something to take an early lead on. Sprouts down on the week, post earnings the prior week. Mercado Libre with a nice earnings gap on Thursday. Again, double base breakout prior to earnings and a continuation pattern. So looks very good, very expensive stock, but definitely a leader in international markets. Coupang was another standout on earnings. This, like Mercado Libre, are online retail similar to Amazon, and that broke out of a big double bottom base on nice volume here. Again, it tends to be a volatile stock, but keep an eye on this as it approaches these old. Again, this is this week's close, and the high of November was 26.91. So 26.91, setting an alert for that just to keep an eye on it. Lava with earnings this week. Chewy, another new high here. Barely in the cup pivot zone. Again, a stock I'm just kind of watching. Not much growth here, but again, a big recovery after a stage 4 and now building the stage 2 base up here. Deere with earnings next week. Agricultural area has been, showing some strength here, so we're keeping an eye on this. Mosaic and the fertilizer group had a big gap on earnings. Not much growth, but after 2 years of negative earnings, with a lot of it probably had to do with Ukraine not being able to produce goods and buy fertilizer, but now big turnaround coming. So this is something to keep an eye on in the turnaround area. Toast, positive reaction on earnings, broke out of this low cup with handle. Again, you had this base here which it undercutted with this new base, so it sets up as a new stage 1 base, set up with a low level cup with handle going to earnings, and now naturally had some resistance right around this 43 area. So we will watch this. Nice volume on the week, nice growth ahead, and definitely an innovator with can slim characteristics. Sezzle in the fintech area, another huge standout, broke out to all-time highs. Watching this name, again, some big growth here. Johnson Controls, talked about that last week, but the data center area, showing some strength as well as the power generation build out space. So nice stage one double bottom breakout. And Robinhood with nice follow through this week. Again, we really keyed in on this as it had two hammers off the 21 EMA, closed at the highs of both of those days. Pullback buy triggered on the 7th, Wednesday the 7th, took positions, and bam, follow through breakout. Good job to the team on that. LPL Financial, another stock in the financial investment bank area with relative strength, making new highs. Axon with an earnings gap and move coming up on the highs of this big base that it got destroyed from. So again, natural for it to probably come up here and build a handle before it takes a shot at that all-time high. Again, that was a fast and furious sell-off on that particular day. GEV is an institutional name we're all in. And again, one of the things that we really like about this, it is the first stock in this alternative energy area that's overcome the deep seek sell-off level. Again, ran into some resistance into this gap. So it filled this gap, ran into some resistance from this deep seek gap down the day prior close, reversed off of that and traded back through on Friday. So again, building somewhat of a handle up here would be constructive on GE, and relative strength making new highs on the week. CEG is a confirmation in the same alternative energy group with an earnings gap this week. Oklo, the nuclear power small fission reactor company with a move back above the 200-day moving average, earnings in 3 days. So just wanted to bring that into the picture too. Palantir, although down 5% on the week, constructive action, big run into earnings. I mean, this was 66 to 125. So, a double going into earnings, natural sell-off. No, it was a beat. It wasn't as big of a beat as in the past, but stock recovered very nicely. Tested the 21 EMA, closed off the 21 EMA, had a nice move on Thursday and a nice inside quiet day on Friday. So this looks very constructive, building a nice little handle here. So this is all very constructive action on the markets. SAP, talked about that last week. CoreWeave and IPO we're watching. Violent week, again, little trading history and it's a new name, but looking good, and we're keeping an eye on this. Penumbra, sold all my position in Penumbra last week just as it wasn't able to go while I was getting positive feedback on a lot of other names, but it continues to be very volatile on this earnings shakeout. Nice breakout into the double bottom base, but really not much progress, but still looks very good. And a patient investor could definitely still be in this. And it's also a 3-week tight. Okay, PODD in the insulin pump area had a huge week. These stocks have been out of favor for quite a while. Had a beautiful 20% day on 200. So this qualifies as a monster earnings gap, and this is very viable. Dexcom also had a positive earnings reaction, but this one much worse shape than PODD. Sorry, PODD. You can see this is almost back to all-time highs here. So much better chart, decent earnings. So this would be the stock of the two I would choose. And Transmedic Group is another name, organ transplant business. Again, deep sell-off here. Stage 2 or stage 1 base, and now potentially entering a new stage uptrend. Naturally found resistance up here into this old gap. Filled this gap, and you'll see this. You got this overhead resistance here. Turned around, so we'll watch this and see how it trades over the next couple of weeks. Corteva, this is another agricultural name that looks very constructive in a new stage 1 base. On earnings, 48% increase, broke through a nice stage 1 base. And again, along with Deer, along with Mosaic, looks pretty good here, and it's breaking through again, 2.5 years, 3 years worth of base here. So nice base breakout on Corteva. This was a name I went pretty big into this week. Started buying it in the aftermarket. My cost is around 65.30 on it. Ended up selling about 40% of it. I did not like how it gave back and pulled back to its pivot, although this is pretty normal and it's still above its 5-day moving average, which I don't have on here. So again, I'm going to play it safe. Sold 40% of this position. If it can act constructively next week, I would consider taking a new position back or increasing my position in it again, because this was a pretty nice base breakout here. 36% base. Again, solid numbers, multiple years of profitability. I do think that it was probably impacted by the pharmaceutical news and the tariff news, because their delivery system is licensed to several pharmaceutical companies, including Roche, which has the big MS drug. So there could have been some fears potentially that the tariffs might slow down their future sales. So we'll see. Pretty normal. And I think, what is it, 50-60% of stocks that break out do come back and retest their pivot. So this could be normal action, although I want to see them kind of hold in there. Talk about Bitcoin. Ferrari seems to be insulated from tariffs by the rich, building a cup stage 1 base. Tesla we talked about. OSCR is another stock I took a position in for Toddzilla this week. Again, this is a pretty inexpensive stock. Has beat and raised several quarters in a row and had near record volume outside of this week here in March of 2023. Was able to get back above all its key moving averages. A lot of overhead here, but this is a monster earnings gap, up 30% on 470% increase in volume. The other thing I look at is 3 closes above the high volume close day. Again, you got some overhead resistance up here at 1885. Stock kind of came into these areas, and this is pretty natural. So if you're going to play these in 3 weeks of big volume here, 3 days of big volume, you've got to expect some pause and some building and some time for these averages to turn up. Quanta Services, again, we talked about this last week. EQT in the natural gas area. Nice stage 1 base, relative strength making new highs. Keeping an eye on that. Uber with a gentle pullback here. Watching this, we have positions in this as well. Lyft with a nice earnings gap. Competitor to Uber up 28% on a 500% increase in volume. This is another monster earnings gap. Again, still in a base here. A lot of overhead, but definitely strong. Carvana, also earnings this past week. Gapped up, closed below the lows of the gap up. Might need to handle out a little bit, but again, ran into resistance at the old highs. CCJ not viable here yet, but the uranium stocks traded higher this week, so just putting it on the list. Avgo, 2% on the week. Definitely the leader in the semiconductor area. Amphenol, 2-week tight now. Tempus AI, just another stock we're watching here. This was a Nancy Pelosi buy. She went into a procedure back here, bought the stock. Naturally, everybody tracks her portfolio, exploded, came back down and kind of broke through this double bottom base here. So that's it for the week. Love to hear from you. My email is todd@revereasset.com. My Twitter is @ToddMichael70. If you'd like to become a client or speak with Dan Stewart or Don Vandenborg, please give us a call at 855-REAL-WEALTH. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.